One of the most common questions that I get as someone teaching how to make perfume, aka perfumery, here on my YouTube channel goes something along the lines of, how do I make my perfumes last longer? And often that question takes the form of, hey, I've gone and started perfumery, I've gone and made a blend and I really like the smell of it. Now, what do I need to add in order to make it project and last a long time? Now, a lot of these people have gone one step further and ask, I've heard I can use something like Isoi Super or Ambroxan or DPG to add to my perfume in order to make it project and last a long time. How much do I need to add? Or that they've gone and added that stuff and now their perfume smells flat or something along the lines of that. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you, simply put, what you need to know, what you need to understand in order to make your own perfume compositions last a long time, to make them project. In other words, to make them perform as you would like to make them perform, i.e. usually that is similar to designer perfumes, the ones you find in shops. So let's get into it then. Now, I want to start by saying that the way this question has been phrased and the way that most people ask it kind of starts with this presupposition, and this is really the root cause of most people's problems. And that's because most people presuppose that you can get the smell that you want, you can get it to smell like how you like it, and then it's just as simple as adding some kind of magic beans or some kind of magic substance. You add that and then suddenly your perfume will work just like the ones in the shop. Suddenly it will perform and it will all be fixed. Now, I hate to break it to you, that is not in reality how it works. In fact, if that was how it worked, you probably wouldn't really need perfumers, because anyone could just mix a couple of things that smell nice together, add this magic stuff, and there you go, you have the next big designer perfume. You know, you wouldn't need all of that specialist knowledge that actual professional perfumers spent years and years and years studying and learning. So why then do people run into trouble? Now, the reason is because usually their composition does one of two things. It usually either projects but doesn't last a long time, or it lasts a long time but doesn't project, and they want to add some kind of missing thing to make it do both. Now, the innate problem with this is that projection, aka your raw materials coming out, and especially in technical perfume, what we'd call impact, which is when you spray perfume and initially it has that big waft of smell which goes across the room. That is pretty much the opposite in chemical terms, in a sense, to longevity. And longevity is when something sticks around a long time, and often, not always, but often that is associated with more subtle smells. So usually people have one and they want to now add the other to their perfume. But the reason that these things inherently are quite opposite, and I say quite because there are some things that do a little bit of both, and we'll talk about those later. But the reason that those are inherently opposite all comes down to the way molecules work. And you can think of it as the molecule, whatever it is on your skin or your clothes or wherever you've sprayed that perfume. It could be your scent strip or your test strip if you're using those to evaluate something. If you think about it, the more of your molecules that evaporate more quickly, that means usually the smell is gonna evaporate more, right? It's gonna diffuse further, you're gonna smell it more quickly and from further away. But the side effect of that is because those molecules have quickly evaporated off of your surface, there's now not many molecules left to stick around. Conversely, if you have something like a musk which lasts a long time, well, those molecules will stick to your surface and they won't evaporate that often. That's why they last a long time, because they only evaporate, the molecules, relatively speaking, every now and again. So that's why they are subtle, because at any given one time, you've only got a few of them evaporating. So in general, you're not smelling as many of them at once, so there's less smell. But they last a long time because now these molecules are still there because not so many of them have evaporated, so they're sticking around longer. So that is kind of the basic premise of a kind of volatility in perfumery, assuming that we smelled all things to equal strengths, which we don't. and that is, something we'll talk about in a sec, but assuming we did, then it's basically you have to pick either or. You either pick high projection, i.e. high volatility, or you pick high longevity, or a balance of the two. Now, you'll notice I did say that some raw materials do a little bit of both, and that is true, and that's because certain raw materials, they last a long time, they don't necessarily evaporate as quickly, but some of them can have quite low, what we call odor detection thresholds, i.e. even a small amount is picked up quite sensitively by the nose, which means you don't need a lot of them to actually give a strong effect. So usually things like Isui Super and Broxan, but there are more of these raw materials, for example, things like vanillin. The specific raw materials that fit into this category are very important to perfumers because these are the ones often that really allow you to kind of get the best of both with that initial impact, projection, and longevity in your perfumes. But, and there is a but, the key thing to know is it's not just as simple as that simply dumping some of these into your perfume will magically fix all of your problems, and there's two main reasons for that. The first of these reasons is the fixative effect, and this is simply to say that when you add something that lasts a long time, what it usually does is pulls down the top notes a little bit with it. So it flattens that volatility curve. If you have a lot of something that's, you can think of them as sticky, like gunky substances, a bit like quicksand. So when you have molecules with high longevity, for example, things like musks, often what they can do is kind of trap, to some small degree, some of the actual top notes, the volatile molecules, and make them last longer. But remember we said before about how volatility works. If you make something last longer by actually causing the molecules to evaporate less quickly, that means that necessarily there's not going to be as many in the air at one time, which means that you're not going to smell it quite as strongly. But essentially what that means is if you add something that's going to fixate something else, i.e. some base notes and sometimes some of these raw materials, or even things that don't have a smell. DPG is one that's popularly used for this kind of thing. Well then, if you do that by necessity, it's going to flatten out, i.e. reduce the initial projection, the impact of your perfume. So a lot of people say, hey, I've gone and added some of these materials, some of these long-lasting synthetics. Why does my perfume smell flat now? Well, that's the reason, because you've added this fixative effect. So, basically by improving one thing, you've disimproved something else. Okay, now the second reason that usually just adding things like this doesn't work out is because when you add these things, these certain materials, and especially these ones that are popular like Isui Super and Ambroxan, these are raw materials which, when you learn how they smell and perform on their own, you'll notice, yes, they do actually last a long time and they do project throughout that duration as well. But you will also notice they have their own smell. Now, if they didn't have their own smell, then they wouldn't be very useful at all, right? Because it's the fact that their unique smell, which usually smells, quite pleasant in a lot of these, that's why they're so popular, has also those performance properties, which is really why they're used so much. But now you've got to remember that when you go and add these to your composition, it's not like a magic substance which just makes everything else in your composition project and last longer. No, it's just adding this smell into your composition which on its own projects and lasts longer. So you're not actually making everything else in your composition specifically last longer and project. You're just adding in another smell as part of your composition, which does that, right? So people complain, well, I've added these things and now it doesn't smell like how I originally wanted it to smell anymore. Well, of course it doesn't, because you've added a new smell to it. So there's no magic thing, right, that's going to make what you've already made project and last longer. You just add in other bits which do that. So then, what is the solution to all of this? Well, honestly, it's really quite simple. The solution, as boring as it sounds, is to compose your perfumes in the first place with not only the smell in mind, but also the performance. i.e., you cannot have the performance of performant raw materials without also introducing their smells. So therefore, when you are composing your perfume, you actually need to compose both for performance and smell concurrently, or both of those things at the same time. And that's exactly why perfumery is so difficult. That is why perfumers spend so long training, learning raw materials, studying formulas and things like that, because it takes a long time to be able to compose perfumes that both smell great and perform at the same time, because it's essentially a balancing act between raw materials which perform but also give you the kind of creative smell you want. Long story short, you have to compose both for performance and smell at the same time. You cannot just make a smell you like and add something nice later to make it last and all of this. And like I said, this is hard. That is why perfumers spend so long studying, because it's a true skill and it takes time to practice. So then, maybe you're feeling a bit lost. Your next question might be, okay, Sam, well then, in that case, how do I learn to compose these perfumes which both smell nice and perform at the same time? Well, here's how you do it. Like I've said many times on my channel, the first step is really learning your raw materials. Now, I've done videos about that before, so I'll link those in the description. I won't cover them again right now, but essentially you need to have a very thorough understanding of your raw materials. That means doing a lot of smelling and evaluating them. I like to do this in dilution and really learning their properties. And this actually allows you to unpick the performance of each thing. You really need to know which raw materials are top, mid, and base notes, and actually how much each of them project. It kind of allows you to build a map in your head of which raw materials are gonna give you which performance properties to your compositions. Now, while you're doing this, you really want to keep a special eye out for the raw materials which both last a long time and project, because these ones are very useful in making perfume compositions which both last a long time and project. And these are what are often employed in designer perfumes. So it's good to take a note of these particular raw materials, but it doesn't mean you just always go and shove them in. It just means you know them in your head, so that when you're working on a certain kind of concept or type of composition, you're already you have ideas of what certain things you might be able to look at adding, especially in order to ensure that you've got the right performance characteristics in your blend. So then once you've gone and done that, it's simply a matter of learning to compose perfume structures which perform well, essentially learning how to use all of these raw materials to compose in a way that both smells nice and performs. Now, how do you go and do all this? Well, the good thing is that it's probably the best time ever to learn perfumery online. There's more information out there than there ever has been before. So, go online, you've got loads of places like Base Note forums, obviously all of the free videos on my channel, and you've got other people these days making content about perfumery as well. So those are good starting points, but then the actual legwork is just something that you have to do yourself. You have to go and buy these raw materials, you have to go and actually learn them and actually do that, and then start practicing to make blends. And things that can be useful are both learning how to make your own blends from scratch, mixing things together, but also studying existing formulas. If you want all of this information in a neatly packaged way, which is efficient to learn, and you want to be able to kind of go through all the right things and get it done, in the right order, quickly, in my opinion, that is, then another thing you can consider checking out is my online course, where I teach pretty much everything I know about perfumery. In that, I teach how to learn your raw materials properly and in detail. I explain fixatives, what they are and how they work. I actually give a lot of these certain raw materials that are very useful in perfume compositions. And I also talk about those in the course, so that you should have an idea of how to use them. And then we study perfume structures using actual formulas you can follow along with and make up yourself to get an idea of how these materials are used in compositions. And finally, I also teach my own guide for perfume creation techniques, i.e. composition techniques. So when you run into these roadblocks, the kind of thought processes you want to use in order to kind of steer your formulas in the direction you want to go in. So that is another option as well. If you're interested in that, then I'll put a link to that in the description of this video down below. So that's it, what you need to know in order to make your perfumes last longer. I'll see you soon with another video all about perfumery, and we'll learn about some more stuff.